All right, welcome to the Essential Libertarians. I'm your host, Kareem, anarcho-pluralist, and recently Austrian communalist because I've been reading Bookchin. And joining me is Chris Baker of LP Texas and the Fountainhead Forum. What up, Chris?
How are you, Kareem?
I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
Good.
You're in Pennsylvania, right?
Correct. I am part of the Mises Caucus in Pennsylvania. I also run a small site called Anarch Unity, where we talk about all different types of anarchy because I think it's interesting. Also joining me is Noah Starling. He's an ancient anime connoisseur and he likes Megadeth. And I have Lizard Jesus from Mad Liberty Project. So we got everybody here tonight. I'll just start with my opening statements. So you contacted me because of my remarks when I said I don't think Javier Milei, this was about his video on Twitter, where he said specifically that the Cuban protesters or Cuban people should rise up and do regime change. Now, there's a few reasons I would object to that, and I'll give you mine now. Also, Lizard's, done some looking into Milei, but the first thing is, even if he was the best ruler ever, or the best president ever, regime change every time a United States or an affiliate of the United States has wanted to do regime change, whether they did it militarily or whether they suggested it or whether they did it by policy, and this could go from Iraq to Ukraine, I don't think it has ended well for the population. Actually, things do get worse. And even in not great situations, things even somehow manage to get worse. So I agree with Daniel McAdams. Even though someone might not be the ideal, because there is no good ruler, but someone might not be the guy you want in power, I'm not a fan necessarily of calling for regime change because you can always get something worse. And in the past, that has happened where we got something worse. There's also the issue, I think, you label these people communists, which is interesting, which is why Lizard Jesus is here. Che Guevara, all these people who, and even going back to the Soviet Union, the root word of communism is communal. So you have communal ownership. So I argue a lot of times the Marxists, the Leninists, all these statist, quote unquote, communists, or I would just call them statist Marxists, aren't following a framework of communal ownership. They're following a framework of state-dominated ownership, which is much different than you voluntarily saying, okay, you can use my green screen on Tuesdays or Wednesdays if I have that, and then I give it back to you, or you can check it out, like checking goods out like a library. That's not what they're doing. As far as Javier Milei himself, he's a self-declared Ancap. It's interesting because an Ancap would mean ideally there is no president unless it's a president of a company. But fine, let's say he's a classical liberal and in practice is what people say, and then he's an Ancap. Ideally, there's a few things that has made me, not exactly even want to give him the label of classical liberal, and that is, to me, I'm not a fan of using the dollar, although he's saying, well, we're trying to get the bad money out, but then taking a loan from the IMF. Also, recently, he was shaking hands with Blinken, and I looked into what that deal was. That was on Daniel McAdams' Twitter. He was getting some, I guess it was jets, I forget, F something for Blinken. So, he's also aligning himself with Ukraine, which I think is a huge red flag, because if I was an anarcho-capitalist, that'd be the last thing I'd want to do, is be involved in that situation. Israel, I don't really like. Okay, he's Jewish, fine, whatever. That's not the people are fixating on that. I'm not going to fixate on that, but I will also say, being buddy with a lot of these senators, being buddy with a lot of people who are statists, including Trump, that is not necessary. And Maloney, he's not urging anybody even to get out of the EU. This is not what I'd really want to see out of somebody who's anti-establishment. Did he cut some government positions? Yes. Fine, that's good. Did he cut some regulations? Yes. Overall, I would say he's probably closer to what I would consider, because he's getting a lot of, I guess, help, or getting a lot of camaraderie from the US NATO crowd. He feels to me more like a neoliberal. Also, we can say he did not end the drug war. He hired Patricia Bullrich. He's on board with a scanning ID system there, and in my opinion, I'm not really a fan of the guy. I wanted to be when he got elected, but I have a sneaking suspicion that he's using the label anarcho-capitalist, and either the powers that be said, hey, let him in, and then he acts like a neoliberal, then people say, or he acts like whatever you want to call it, you can give it another term. But I'm not necessarily on the Javier Milei boat, because to me, I want to see not just taking away government jobs and regulations. I'd actually like to see, and this is from reading Bookchin most recently, I'd actually like to see a full-fledged plan, if you are an anarchist, to completely dismantle the state and hostility towards existing statists. Unless you're trying to get elected, but he's already got elected. So if I got elected, I would not be nice to anybody who I work with. I'd probably make them scared of me. I'm already making them scared of me. Most Republicans run away when I say defund the DMV and the drug war. So that's my analysis on why I don't think he should do it, why I don't think that was good, why I don't think these people are communists, and my brief look at Milei. I'm not a geopolitical expert. That's my thoughts.
Well, in many respects, you're correct that the Marxist Leninists really aren't communists. I mean, if you want to talk about something, like about Josiah Warren's New Harmony or something like that, or I mean, you can only really have communism at a small level where everybody knows everybody. And that's otherwise, you're going to have yes. So I agree with you on that. But I mean, as far as the more statist version of communism, I certainly understand why he opposes that. And I don't know if you've heard of the Sao Paulo Forum, but it's a consortium of all these communist parties or socialist parties in South America and Latin America. And the leading communist parties help the communists in Venezuela and Cuba have been helping communists in other countries. They've been trying to get regime change themselves. Castro succeeded in Venezuela when he let the communists take over, and I'm very fed up with a lot of what the American government does, but I also realize that sometimes my enemy's enemy is my enemy, and sometimes my enemy's enemy is my friend. I certainly don't think these, governments like the Venezuelan communists or the Cuban communists are any friends of liberty at all. I personally know one person that if he goes back to Venezuela, he'll probably be killed. So so that's one reason why Milei. I mean, interestingly enough, too, I don't think Milei has not said anything about the EU, but he's certainly been friendly to people who aren't friendly to the EU. Believe it or not, Vladimir Zelensky was at his inauguration, and believe it or not, Viktor Orban was there too, and apparently they almost got into a fight. So but that's another thing though too, maybe where it's sort of my enemy's enemy is my friend, because I believe Putin funds some of these communist groups in South America. So that's probably why Milei could be a reason why Milei doesn't really like Putin. But I don't really know all of Milei's motivations. Another thing too is, the president of the USA can cheer on his favorite NBA team and his favorite NFL teams, and I think that's fine. It's only when he wants to use taxpayer dollars to help them out that I have a problem. So yeah, I don't think there's a there are some things that do worry me, and the only thing I can say too is Think about how long it can take to demolish a building or how long it can take to tear down a building. You're not going to tear down a socialist state in a day or even in a few months. It's going to take a lot of time.
So, personally, I'm for a no state solution on pretty much all fronts. This does definitely include the Argentinian thing. I'm not a very big supporter of Milei, because I wish that he would establish a more voluntary way of going about things. I think that people should be allowed to live in ways that are able to operate outside of the market that he's trying to employ, if that makes sense. But I do believe that like what Millet wants and people that agree with him should be able to establish like that kind of system for themselves. So like coming from like a very well-read anarchist and voluntarist perspective, I just think that Millet is kind of taking advantage of a lot of free market anarchists and turning them towards nationalism. And it's kind of an unfortunate thing to see because I think that anarchy kind of starts with us and establishing it with ourselves and the people around us. And it doesn't really start at a political podium or voting for somebody. Too often it's the case that like politicians promise great things but then don't deliver. So I don't see why it would be different in this scenario. That's just my 2 cents on it.
It may not be, but one key fact about Milei, I think, is that I've talked to people who have said, I became a libertarian because of Milei. This is what's really profound for me. I mean, I saw his book in the airport in Peru once, one of those bookstores, and he's really having an impact on changing people's minds that I don't think has happened before. I mean, it sounds like you've got situations where plumbers and truck drivers are reading economics books. I think that's a good thing. Even and yes, I certainly agree that if somebody talks about the ideas of freedom and then completely sells them out or fails in a government position, that ends up discrediting those ideas, and you end up off worse than before. I certainly don't want Milei to become another Alan Greenspan, but I think he's already shown that he's not going to become an Alan Greenspan.
I don't know exactly what he's going to become, but here's what I would say in reference to your earlier comments. I get that there are forms of, if you want to call them Marxist authoritarians or authoritarian communists, that get together and they're no friend of liberty. I tend to be careful with my friend, the enemy of my enemy, or the enemy of not my enemy, because that can get you into some muddy water. Where there are people in the Mises caucus who have inadvertently, in my opinion, yes, I like ANCOMs, but at least ANCOMs are anarchists, right? Even though I don't agree with maybe a specific ANCOM or ANPRIM or another anarchist or a mutualist, at least they're anarchists. I know they're going to leave me alone at the end of the day if we have an economic disagreement. But there are people who said like, well, my enemy of my enemy is my friend. So you can actually turn that around. And the same argument that you said, well, you don't like, Milei doesn't like Putin. There's been a few people like, well, Putin's fighting for traditional values and he's against the West. I'm for traditional values. So I've seen a few people support that. I've seen a few people support Milei. Then, and that's even the one thing like I disagree with. Like I don't support Milei. I don't support Putin. I don't really support anybody except like the Zapatistas, Autonomous Zones, maybe Rick Falkvina and Jet of Liberland, because those are very decentralized.
Yeah.
In reference to does Milei like Putin or not, I've not seen anything to say he does or he doesn't or what he thinks of him. I'd actually have to Google that, but I don't think there's much information. Viktor Orban was also there, yes, and Zelensky was there, so I'm not going to say like, oh yeah, he's buddy with Zelensky, but just certain things make me a little bit, I guess, dubious. And I'll give you an example. Like I'll give you direct physical, empirical examples. I get this as Twitter, but Milei shares the same regional interests with the White House, and Biden instructed his staff to facilitate the Freedom Government. Advances on key issues the address can address in favor of Argentina from the perspective that the negotiation with the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, was the first political event, exit harmony between the Oval Office and Balcret 50. I don't know if I'm saying that right. With support of U.S., Argentina signed a letter of intent with Denmark to buy 24 F-16 fighter jets, a political decision by Javier Milei. Now, here's the thing. You could say, well, and here's him with Blinken. Like, I guess for me, and okay, you can say I am biased because I came from the punk rock scene. So I still have a little bit of libertarian left in me, and I read Bookchin, I read Kropotkin and stuff like that. So yes. Do I have a bias to libertarian left ideas? Yes.
Yeah.
That being said, I would like to see, like even Ron Paul, I would like to see somebody a little bit unconventional. Like the same thing I think about Milei is the same thing I think about Trump, where people like the MAGA idea. They like the idea of the guy. And sometimes when you like the idea of someone, like I've done with my past ex-girlfriends, I project what I'd like to see onto that person, even if they don't exhibit that in physical reality. And that's what I think is Trump was a Democrat, but people think Trump is, in my opinion, some kind of minarchist or classical liberal. I think Javier Milei is an Ancap, and I don't think he truly is. For me, instead of supporting my enemy is my enemy or my enemy is my friend, I would actually say let's go back and see what principles align anarchists. I would say it's voluntary association, decentralization, in my opinion, down to the local level. You can say the individual as well, but I'm not opposed to saying, hey, let's pitch in some money at the local level so Bob can do the garbage every 2 weeks or something. Let's go to a municipal meeting and figure out the kind of services we want or school board stuff. I'm not against that per se. But at the end of the day, it's voluntary interaction, decentralization, and then also being able to be tolerant of people, even if they have, different views, as long as they're not infringing on you. I'd suggest going that route rather than going into temporary alliances based on something that may or may not be good. I'll give you an example with myself. There are a few tankies who are pro-Palestine. I'm pro-Palestine. But I know for a fact, once this ends and there's a good resolution or something happens, these pro-tanky people, if I'm friends with them, what will happen is it'll cause a huge issue because I have a lot of ANCOM friends and a lot of people in the Ancap community are going to say, Kareem, you're being real friendly with, and you can pick anyone who's a tanky, literally, you're being friends with them because of this one issue. And that I see is problematic. So hopefully that made sense and I have that was concise.
You made a very insightful comment that we often do project what we want people to be onto them. And we do that in a lot of areas, and it's not something I really think about. It's like the super fan who, the super football fan who picks his team to win, comes up with reasons how his team's going to win the Super Bowl every year, or politicians, or of course romantic partners. Oh yeah, I hate that he smokes cigarettes, but he'll change, or something like that. And of course they don't change, and then you give up. And I will admit, Kareem, I'm not innocent of this. I mean, I have, when I've gotten into debates about Milei, I just finally say to people, what else is there to believe in? And really, there really isn't much of anything else to believe in. I
think there is.
Yeah, it's, I don't really have much, and first of all, I don't really have a whole lot of faith in America at all anymore. So that's another. So I'm looking abroad, and yes, you definitely can.
Yeah. It sucks that you've arrived at a point where you feel like there's no better alternative. I've I've been there before in my mind, but have you ever heard of the Parallel Society? It's
Parallel
basically,
society.
yeah. So the Academy of Ideas is a YouTube channel that does an awesome job of explaining what it is
Yes.
and like the history of
What
it.
is that annoying noise?
Sorry, that's my 3D printer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of background noise. Sorry.
Okay, so I don't know if I can do much about that because I'm at my 3D printing table.
Okay.
Oh, cool. 3D printing. Hey, good for you.
But
Counter economics.
so like the Parallel Society is basically like where you start building up and implementing what you want to see in the world with the people around you, like I said earlier. Um, and you know, it might be dangerous at times given the current situation that we live in, being in America and all.
Yeah.
But like eventually, like the goal is to basically establish systems that replace what the state structures offer, so that we can stop using the system here and just rely on each other in our communities, whether that be through like free market economics or through like homesteading communalism, like what I do. And eventually, like if so many people do this, the state will become unnecessary and just kind of like so many people will stop using it, and at that point they might get violent. But I do think that that's a healthy alternative than like casting your hope onto a politician, because here you can like with this metric you can implement like real change in your community and with the people around you, and give the people around you hope and shit like that. You know, like it's good stuff.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I respect that. You're probably familiar with freedom cells, and really another alternative would be Bitcoin. Although I'm starting to worry about where the Bitcoin community is going, but it's not. I mean, it doesn't replace everything, but it certainly creates this alternative currency and there are other alternatives as well. You maybe being anarchists, you guys might be more sympathetic to Monero. So yes, I
So here's the thing, like, I'm sympathetic, right? But at the same time, we get like when we try to put our confidence in a person, it leads to things like personality cults. It leads to things like cargo cults in order to support those personalities. We see that with the Biden fan base. Like, they're rabid. They'll support anything he does. They'll latch on to any tiny little thing that he does for a union and forget all the unions he crushed. They'll latch on to him forgiving student loans and then forget that he can't do that and that he only canceled like a tiny amount of them. Like any promise that he made, he's been woefully inadequate at actually keeping, because that was never the point. The point was always to give enough lip service to the people who could comprise your base that when you had the opportunity to be an elected official, or as I called it, a selected official, because I don't believe in the legitimacy of the voting process. Um, when you get selected, you have to play ball. Like Javier Milei is working with the World Economic Forum. Like at the end of his long speech, where everybody's like, he's fighting the socialists, he said, Argentina is your staunch and unconditional ally, and you're the protagonists in this story. When he spent his campaign going against Patricia Bullrich, and claiming that she wasn't effective at doing what she did, immediately, as soon as he won, as soon as he got selected, he put her at the head of his basically foreign policy and allowed her to start a new war on drugs. He said this in the same breath that he said, I hate the war on drugs, freedom, damn it, because I said a cuss word and that means I'm based. Um, it's like that, and it becomes real clear when he starts working with Janet Yellen's cabinet of Federal Reserve lackeys, when he starts working with the IMF, when he starts working with Lockheed Martin and supporting Israel and Ukraine. when he supports all these boilerplate positions of the global elite and falls in line with basically Bidenist agendas. The fact that he might have said that the previous country was socialist doesn't actually change the fact that if that is indeed socialism, he's along the same lines. He's just in charge of it now. So my point is that, like, we need to stop putting our faith in people and start putting our understanding and backing behind ideas. And, like, the ideas that are proven to work are the ones that we back. The ideas that are proven to actually have a real world stable impact are the ones that we work toward. And that means building resilient groups against the state and not working with the state at all. Because whenever you work with the state, you're signing a deal with the devil, and that's going to take your soul.
So yeah, I'll let you.
I would say, I do wonder why he hasn't, turned down the drug war more. I do hear from people there that they really don't go after people for possession unless it's. And I asked somebody, what happens if a cop, sees me with cocaine or marijuana instead? He said it depends on how much you have. So if it looks like you possess it just for personal use, you're not going to be. Yeah, I certainly am not. I certainly said some nasty things about Bullrich myself before the endorsement myself. I mean, yeah, and of course he wouldn't have gotten. I don't know if he would have gotten elected without that. I mean, I'm reminded of of what Lord Acton said. At all times, sincere friends of freedom have been rare, and its triumph has always been due to minorities. But to achieve those ends, we sometimes have to ally ourselves with methods that can be dangerous. Maybe Acton was wrong, but yeah. Furthermore, I also think he's working with what he's got. I mean, people have said to me that if it not for Milei, this would have been another Venezuela. So when you're in that bad a situation, how do you get out of a bad situation?
Well,
it's hard to say. Furthermore, also, if a guy comes out and openly opposes the USA and says, "Oh, Joe Biden is evil, Donald Trump is evil, everything America does is evil in the Western Hemisphere," how do the CIA might take him out?
Well, I understand that. Like, I understand the desire to play the game so that you can potentially win it, right? But here's the thing: you won't. And if he's going to play this game, the politics game, and he has a shred of moral fiber or dignity, he will start speaking out against these things the same way he did before he got in, after he's in. But instead, what he's doing is he's giving helicopters to Ukraine, and he's getting more and more military hardware from Lockheed Martin after meeting with Joe Biden and saying that our countries align interest wise. And he's doing this while also managing a facial recognition super state, where you're not allowed to wear masks at a protest, and if you do, you will be fined, and you can't carry a stick either. You already couldn't carry a gun because the existing laws. He just removed more freedoms. And while he's doing all this, he's also making it easier for the cops to shoot people. And I'm not making that up. Like, he loosened restrictions on police use of force. And when you do all this, when you work with the same police and military industrial complexes, it doesn't seem like he's trying to actually win the game for anarchists. What it seems like he's trying to do is standard Naomi Klein style shock doctrine. And that's never going to be good for anybody but the state capitalists, as Murray Rothbard would accurately label them.
So I have to head out here. I hope we all don't mind if I make a couple points before I do. Coming from my side of the aisle, which is the anarcho-communist side of the aisle, the last time that we aligned with an authoritarian regime was back during the Russian Civil War, and it was when we established the Ukrainian Free Territory under Nestor Makhno, and he made a temporary alliance with the Bolsheviks, who were essentially like Stalin's army, in order to defeat the White Army. And there were multiple factions fighting going on, but ultimately that temporary alliance brought the downfall of the entire Ukrainian Free Territory, and the Red Army ended up absorbing it. Um, so aligning with authoritarians from an anarchist perspective on life can turn out to be a very dangerous thing. Um, Historically, and it still happens today with grassroots movements and things like that. But also, I linked that Academy of Ideas in the chat here in the StreamYard. I don't know if you guys see that, but I'm
Yeah, I
going to
saw
go
that.
ahead and head out. So
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It sounds like to me you guys aren't really against Milei as much as you're just against allying with anybody like Milei, which I understand. Uh, yeah, I'm sympathetic to all this. I mean, it's possible that it can fail, but I don't know how you get from where we are right now to, and that's really the debate, the source of a lot of arguments among libertarians. How do we get from, or voluntarists or anarchists, how do we get from where we are now to where we want to be? And I think most of us all want to end up in the same place, but we have very different paths of how to get there. So,
Well,
yeah, I was not aware of
what I'll
some of the
say,
things, the sticks and stuff like that. I had
go
no
ahead.
idea about those. Yeah, so those are things I may want to look up somewhere. I didn't. You said outlawing sticks and some other things like facial recognition. Yeah, that's a little troubling.
Yeah, and so that thing, the facial recognition thing, he even included that in his platform. And like, the platform is absolutely insane. If anybody wants to have a bad time as a libertarian, they should read his platform. Because, yeah, sure, it has like nice little platitudes about like, capitalism, opposing socialism, etc. But like, when it comes down to it, a lot of the other things, the planks, are really bad. Like, he has an outright section where he says that what he's going to do is militarize the police, so that he can have a militarized police transition to the new society. And it's literally the word militarization. That should be a gigantic red flag to anybody who's read Radley Palco, to anybody who's followed police brutality in America, to anybody who's followed any sort of another country, especially ones propped up by America. Like, I mean, you mentioned Venezuela. Venezuela has been a subject of heavy regime change and interference by Western powers. So, my point is, my general idea is that when we choose what to support and what not to support, we need to make sure that the baseline assumptions are sound. And one of the baseline assumptions that we need to ensure are sound is that the person involved in spreading libertarian and anarchist ideas is one. And so many things involving Milei aren't. He's working to dollarize. He halved the value of the Argentinian peso against foreign money, specifically the United States dollar. And that was a key driving factor behind the majority of the protests, is the devaluation, because a lot of Argentinians, they don't even necessarily like the way the Peronist regime was going. But you know what they definitely wouldn't like? Being a vassal state, being yet another place where the U.S. can use it as an emplacement for its foreign policy. So it's like, there are so many issues with directly working with the U.S. And one of the things you do if you want to work with the U.S. in the modern day is, we've got a terrible destabilized country and economy. Here's dollarization. And if he's going to make big moves like, oh, I ended the central bank, right? Then he's going to work with the American central bank. Suddenly, all these Americans who say that they don't like their central bank are saying, Viva Milei, while he's helping ours. Like, dollarization would grant huge levels of seigniorage. It would actually be a financial asset to the U.S. government. And so would the fact that the Argentinian economy would be loaded onto the dollar instead of the peso, because the dollar is backed by U.S. hegemony, which effectively means that saying that your country is on the dollar, now your country has to play ball in order to stay on the dollar. And it might be better, maybe, than playing ball with the previous administrations, but like it might also not. And it's kind of reasonable for people to protest mass devaluation of their currency during an economic downturn while the country is becoming a potential vassal of Western power. And so, like, when he lines up in all these other ways with Western power, that's just sort of the cherry on top, because the protests started when he devalued. And then the protests have only continued while he's continued to make policies that make Argentina a vassal state of the US. And in doing so, he's doing the opposite of the libertarian dream and making it harder for libertarians here as well, in a variety of ways that I can mention.
Well, did the U.S. become a vassal state of France when France helped us gain independence from England?
Unironically, yes. Here's where I can put on my anti-revolution tinfoil hat. So the American government owed France gold after the revolution. That was the reason they imposed taxation without representation. That was the reason they had the Whiskey Rebellion crushed. That's the reason George Washington could rally 13,000 people to crush this rebellion, because these people wanted to use alternate currencies. And in using alternate currencies, the Monero of their day, the whiskey that they were using as a competing currency, they were sticking their thumb in the eye of the establishment, who was not, in fact, independent, but owed France money. And the establishment came up and said, hey, yo, we own this block, motherfucker. We own you because we own you. The French are at the helm of this bitch for now. We need to pay him back, and then we can get him off our back.
Yeah, I apologize for my laptop.
Hey, I'd love to talk more about the Whiskey Rebellion sometime. I mean, that's definitely a pivotal event in history, and you have a situation too where the farmers have this corn or whatever, and they got some left over. What do they do with it? They don't just want to let it go to waste, so they make it into whiskey because that's something that'll last. It won't go to waste and can possibly. And they were using it as a form of currency, and then they decided they're going to have a tax on whiskey. I'm not in favor of that at all. It's from one thing those I've heard though too is he's basically allowed people you can pay your employees in beans, or you can pay your employees in dollars, or you could probably pay them in Mexican pesos if you wanted to. It's basic. So that's in some respects introducing some currency flexibility. I agree. Playing the IMF game, I'm not fond of it, but is it possible? How can you possibly stay out of it? I mean, it's not that easy to do. Just ignore the rest of the world. I mean,
I think there's actually sorry, my laptop went goofy. Funny enough, restarted yours.
Yeah.
I guess
stuff happens.
But yeah, hey, free market, we adapt. And that's kind of, I guess, my metaphor of the point I'll go into is how do you get past the IMF? Well, I guess we go back to Mises on Menger's theory of money. And Menger says money is a praxeological means for the use of exchange. I think that's a simple way of saying don't drop a cow off at the car dealership because it'll poop everywhere in a funny frame. But if every time you were to go to the grocery store and be like, all right, I'll give you the apples for apples and this for this, and eventually it's going to barter can get chaotic. Even exchange economies can get chaotic sometimes. I'm not saying you can't do them in small numbers, but once we scale up society, it's hard. So what I would suggest as a praxeological means to get aside from the IMF is, I believe they're called favelas, is you go and find local. I've been reading a lot of Murray Bookchin, so maybe I'm a little bit city statist now, but and the anarchists can yell at me. But you go and say, hey, local municipality, and you do a little bit of research and see what commodity in this local area do people find useful. Say it's Texas. Then you base a currency literally off of that. And then you base you have competing currencies, which did occur in Scotland and Switzerland. And then I'm even for making a state currency as well, That's a backup. And then utilizing gold backs, and then also utilizing cryptocurrency. But here's the biggest thing, I think, is you just find a praxeological means of exchange. What that praxeological means of exchange can differ from place to place, because in America, it's not a big deal if I have a bottle of water. You don't care, right? There's water everywhere you go. Saying like, okay, here. I mean, some people will buy water, and water purification is good, but having a bottle of water is not crazy. In Saudi Arabia, that could be a legitimate currency. You're like, oh wait, water is currency. Yeah, well, actually, salary came from like the idea of salt, like people were actually paid in salt, like,
which is where the term
guess,
"worth your
yes.
salt" comes from.
Yeah,
And in prisons, cigarettes can become a currency.
They could, yeah. It's literally, somebody asked G, and I'll give you this. I would call him like one of the goats of the truth movement. Like, if you're going to go on the internet and look it up on Yandex, that's one thing. But the guy who studied this most extensively is a dude, in my opinion, G. Edward Griffin. Even before Ron Paul was saying in the Fed, he was like going and figuring this out. Like, why does inflation happen? Most people couldn't like. I remember sitting down with people in 3-piece suits. They're like, you need $2 million for retirement, Kareem. I'm like, damn, why? It's like, inflation. Why does it happen? Well, I don't know. Like, their answer was like, it's just some mysterious thing. But he sat down and figured it all out. And they said, well, Mr. Griffin, what do we do? Like, what if I can't get any gold or Bitcoin? He's like, well, that doesn't matter. Like, get something people find useful. Cheap white wine, cigarettes, stuff like that. Speaking of Bitcoin, here's another one. Argentina unveiled mandatory. Here's the problem with this. I know people are going to say, isn't that cool? It's Bitcoin. Don't you like this? Kareem, you're a crypto guy. You have a crypto channel. Argentina unveiled mandatory registry for Bitcoin and crypto platforms. Those who are not registered will not be able to operate in this country. Comisión Nacional de Valores, President Rabo y Silva. And I believe this came from Forbes. So I'll share it now. I'm not going to say Forbes is perfect, but they have this on Forbes. Argentina unveiled mandatory registry for Bitcoin and crypto platforms. I love crypto. I think it's good. I have a crypto channel. I have a lot of subscribers on there. I would never say in a million years, even though I disagree with Peter Schiff's criticisms of it, that, Peter Schiff has to use BTC, or Chris has to use BTC, or Jeremy has to use BTC. So that's the issue. The issue isn't so much what is the practical means of exchange. The issue is what or I should say this. The issue isn't that I have to get with the IMF or not, or this currency. The issue is, what are praxeological means of exchanges, and how can those things compete to find ones that work well? Instead of saying this is mandatory, we must go with IMF, we must go with Bitcoin, we must go even with gold. So hopefully I illustrated that one.
Yeah. I know about that Forbes article that, a lot of people are upset about that. I'm wondering, what that means too. I mean, the devil is often in the details, and somebody mentioned that he pulled out of the whole area because of that. I don't know if it seems like maybe it's impacting things on the Lightning Network as opposed to things that are on chain, which I need to look into the details. I did message the guy who wrote that article. I've actually been asking him about it. And one other person said, well, this is actually just the same thing that other countries do, which that's not what Milei is about. He's just, if you're just doing something because other countries do it, to me, that's not the way to go. But yes.
Like the whole point of Milei, theoretically, was to get somebody who like fucking, he has a chainsaw, he's zany, fucking, he's got like this other way of thinking. And then when it's like, does he though? Does he? It's when you start to be like this, like maybe he doesn't actually have a different way of thinking, and maybe people got played, and that's why he's totally okay with like schmoozing with like, Trump and Yellen and the Pope and the government of Israel and Ukraine and, like the World Economic Forum. Like, the fact that he was on positive terms with Vivek should be a red flag to any libertarian paying attention, because Vivek is a big pharma bro. partially funded by Soros, the brother of George, and he's also like a big pharma like COVID database mandate guy, who like supported that. He wanted a surveillance state of those who had and hadn't taken the jab, and that's evil. Anybody who thinks that that guy's a libertarian or should speak for libertarians is evil, or misguided severely. And like when Milei went up and glad-handed him, when Milei went up and glad-handed Trump, who agrees with Vivek and also did Operation Warp Speed and was a huge fan of the big pharma complex, it's like when Milei says that he's the Argentinian Trump, maybe he's right, and maybe that's a bad thing because Trump wasn't good for liberty or America. And now that he's, getting all these progenitors all around the world of his ideals, it's like, maybe I don't want to be a Trump. Maybe that's not a good thing, and that's why he has so many issues in so many ways. And I kind of don't want to also be friends with Jeff Epstein, but that's another subject.
Yeah, no, we can reserve that for.
Yeah, one of the things we have to ask, or I ask myself all the time, though, is what exactly does Milei know? Because he does not read English or Spanish, as far as I know. So what is the Spanish speaking media reporting on? What are they telling him? I mean, does the Spanish speaking media and immediately I asked some people. Murray Rothbard had this article that he wrote back in the 60s, War Guilt in the Middle East, and I looked around and thought, oh, there's no Spanish translation. So I paid one of my friends who's a professional translator, said, translate this article, and then I actually sent emails to Scott Horton and Ryan McMakin. I said, hey, we got a Spanish translation of Rothbard's War Guilt in the Middle East. And they were like, oh, it's, and I do think that, and really, I think that's on us. He could learn English, but it's on us to put this in to meet him where he's at. We need to, Argentina, a lot of these countries do not have really active anti-war movements because they don't really need to have them. And unfortunately, when often what there is of an anti-war movement in these countries, it's mostly just the communists. Like there was a presidential debate on the 8th of October, the day after the incident. And I first of all, I was in shock. I did not know any opinions Milei had about Israel at the time. So I was like, wow, oh my goodness. And then 4 out of the 5 candidates said, I stand with Israel. And the only one that they didn't stand with Israel was Miriam Bregman, who's the communist, basically. Do
you mean Williamson or I actually don't know. Do you mean Brigman or
Bregman?
Okay, I've never heard of Miriam Bregman.
She was there. There were 5. Well, there was the big jungle primary, and then that narrowed down to 5 candidates. And
you're saying in Malay? Sorry, in Argentina. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So my brain is and this is also this is a failing. I'll admit is that Americans are very Americocentric, and that's a thing that needs to change, especially since right now the neoliberals have a chokehold over the planet, partially because the CIA directly funds other countries' radio-free programs or certain media assets or certain financial institutions or whatever. And they always do it with stopping communism and promoting freedom as a huge driving factor. That's what aerodynamic and muscular were in Ukraine. And it's also the reason that the U.S. CIA helped the Nazis escape Germany. It's the reason they helped the Mujahideen. All these rebel groups and all of these dissident media outlets that are somehow run off from American policy is fucking hilarious. I found out about this on a stream a little bit back. I was like, oh, the Russian Libertarian Party was pretty based in certain replies to the American Libertarian Party. And then somebody's like, oh, well, but didn't you know that one of their chief people is the National Endowment for Democracy recipient? And I was like, oh, wow. That's pretty fucking... You gotta turn that off, Grim. That's pretty fucking bad. It's...
If I was a liberty activist somewhere around the world in the feds offer me money, I'd probably take it because the feds are so stupid that you could take the money and do whatever you want anyway.
They're not. They'll do regime change. They'll get involved. They're looking for vassals and puppets.
All right. Well, here, be careful.
Well, the Mujahideen, look what they did.
They helped the U.S. launch the war on terror, which gave the U.S. a shit ton more power and position and resources, and enabled the petrodollar.
Also, do you realize there are 2 Russian libertarian parties?
Yeah, the one I'm talking about is the NAD one. And it's unfortunate because I liked some of the stuff they were saying, and I'm like, oh shit, it's partially CIA funded. Abort.
Yeah, it's not good. But here's one point I'll make. Like, if you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman by Christopher Hitchens, he does say what they do first is they come in with hey, we'll build a dam, here's a bunch of money, and then they get you in debt to the IMF, and then that's how they control it. But if you say no, then they use the CIA. If you say no, then use the military. China does the same thing, except they're just strictly doing financial debt and stuff. As far as what I think happened, this guy actually breaks it down pretty easily. Neo Bitcoin, Milei caved to pressure from Financial Action Task Force, FATF, who visited Argentina and forced them to pass a law, most likely conditioned to help approve IMF loans. This is global money laundering, terrorist financing watchdog, excuse to build a registry of all transactions, CBDC style. Turns out Milei is a kitty cat, not a lion. He's just another charlatan. He doesn't have the balls of Nayib Bukele, which I have issues with him too, but who's facing equal or even greater pressure to put the IMF and others into their place.
Yes, that's Bukele, but yeah.
Bukele, yeah. I'm all sorry. I do get some of these names wrong. As far as South American leaders, yeah, they don't really have to be anti-war. I've seen some of them having anti-war stances. I would say they do because, like, the other colony, other Western powers, NATO-backed powers, have interfered with them before, just like they've interfered in parts of the global South. So I would say, like, the leader, if we're going to pick one, like, I like Evo Morales, even though he's on a little bit on the left, but he's anti-imperialist to a good point. And I'll say this, that the issue is people get stuck where they say, oh, the quote unquote communist or the Marxist in this country is anti-imperialist. So that's good. And I'll agree on that position, they're good, but then they're not good, in my opinion, as an authoritarian either. Neither are the fascists. So for me, it's not necessarily good to say, do I want Lula or Pinochet? It's a better idea to just say, hey, we're going to embrace freedom. We're going to do stuff. And I do believe, of course, reading Bookchin, his ideas are you have popular assemblies. You can still have free markets, in my opinion. He doesn't agree with that. But to me, you can still have free markets or commune or whatever, primitivist. Then you have a democratic, collectivist, social thing that makes up constitution, makes regulations. Sounds crazy, but to me, the more and more I look at it, the more and more we need local communities to talk to local community, to talk to local communities. And that would be the best thing to do. Now, there is examples of that. I have found one called Fajuva, and Fajuva is like little federations that work together.
Oh, come on. Fajuva is just a sparkling water brand. You're lying.
Yes, I'm lying. An Anarch is not lying, so go check out Anarch's channel. But yes, it's called Fajuva. They have what they call horizontal. You also have things like the Zapatistas and Secas de Sola, which is in Venezuela. And I think the thing that encourages me more is not to look towards, oh, politician A is cool, Lula's good, or Milei is good, or Evo Morales is good, but look at these little communities, or Chiran. Chiran's another one. Chiran's pretty good. So look at stuff like that and say, oh, okay, they work. They're not perfect anarchists, but they're pretty close. They have, the only thing I don't like is they have mandatory, if you live in that area, you have to be on the council, and they're very, very indigenous in that sense. Like, they don't like outsiders. It's not like I can be like, hey, I'm going to roll in Iran, and you can go there, but I don't think you can live there. They kind of want to there.
Yeah, Chiron is a great example. I really do. I really do admire what those people are doing. It's going to be very interesting to see how long those things last. I don't know what you think about, free cities and stuff like that, like what's the one?
Titus Gable. Is it the German guy Titus Gable was talking about that, where you have service providers, and based on those service providers, then you can operate a city? That I like. To be fair, I think if we're going to build a modern, decentralized future, then we need to actually go a little bit beyond Rothbard and go beyond some of the thinkers there. Even though they're good, they lay the basis. The modern examples, I think, are Titus Gable was his free cities, where you establish a city and you say, we have service providers, we have these voluntary programs, let's work here. And then also I do like Bookchin's idea, even though he says, well, we do need now when he says we need a constitution, he's not talking the American Constitution. He says essentially something like a city council or an assembly comes up and says, hey, we want to be governed by these rules in Fort Worth, Texas, or maybe even smaller in a county, and we like traditional values, so let's do common law, or let's do this, and then you kind of draft a constitution, draft rules. So that's his idea. I think somewhere beyond there, and then also, there's different. I think we should always maintain a free market of some sort, though, in some way, because that's going to create, in my opinion, the prosperity for other things to exist.
And just to be clear, like Milei also has immigration restrictions, like that he really slapped into place. If you as a foreigner have a criminal record, you are not allowed to move there. And any foreigner with a criminal record is actively being deported.
I did not know this. Wow.
Yeah.
I heard it was pretty easy. I heard it was pretty easy to get into Argentina. For example, you only have to have 2 years there of residency to apply for citizenship. That's a short time.
Yeah, but like now at this point with his policies, that is still there if you're a good boy. If you didn't piss off your home government, which means that if, for instance, you are, Edward Snowden and you're on the run from like the American government because you stuck your cock where they wanted theirs, and you like exposed to the people that like the American government is a bunch of corrupt fucking snakes. You can't run to Argentina at this point because he's a terrible felon. You can't even apply for asylum, I don't think. And you don't have like if you're what's the guy's name? John Mark Dougan, not Dugan as in Dugin, but Dougan. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's a reasonably good reporter. For anyone who doesn't know, go check out him going through the Azov Battalion headquarters because it's fucking lit. You can see so many swastikas. And when you do this, like you get like these people like can't go to Argentina because Argentina is not a safe haven for actual rebels. And like if you're trying to bill yourself as Ancap agorist god, and you're just like, well, actually, yeah, but if the government doesn't like you, I don't like you either. It's like, maybe you're not.
Yeah, I lost all respect for Ecuador when, well, I don't know if I had that much, but I certainly lost a lot of respect for Ecuador when, Julian Assange was being pulled out of the embassy there.
Mm-hmm.
It was, it's really something, with these, I guess ultimately we'd have to see what happens if there's ever a test case coming up. But yeah, that's definitely disconcerting. I did hear recently that apparently some Venezuelan dissidents actually went to the embassy, the Argentine embassy in Caracas, and they wanted to hang out there. So maybe it'll be interesting to see what he does about that. But yeah, I know what you mean. One thing that would probably restore some faith in America would be if Edward Snowden could come back here and live his life as a citizen. And it's
completely
it's embarrassing that he has to go. It's embarrassing that he has to go to Russia.
5 people. You got to pardon Dugan. because holy shit is that garbage how they treated him for exposing local police brutality. You gotta pardon Snowden. You gotta actually pardon like Manning, even though I don't like how she like behaves anymore, and I think she became a boilerplate Libby, and I don't like that. She doesn't deserve what she has. You pardon
Yeah, they
Ross.
never killed Manning. Yeah.
Yeah, you pardon Ross Ulbricht.
Free Ross.
Because there's no reason he should be where he is, and you should also pardon nonviolent drug offenders. If Biden did those 5 things, he would actually secure a significant amount of libertarian vote, at least people who claim that they are, because they support neoliberal positions. CLC. But like the whole deal, like I have, is when people say, "Oh, yeah, I'm a libertarian, I'm an Ancap, and I don't like the war on drugs," hires Bullrich. I'm a libertarian, I don't like
Yeah.
surveillance and socialist states, creates a facial recognition superstate and bans anonymous protests.
Yeah. I'd like to know more about this facial recognition state. That does, the whole. I didn't. The first time I've heard about the anonymous protests as well. That does kind of bother me.
Yeah, because he wants.
I might add a few people. That I think Reality Winner, and I always like to bring up Leonard Peltier too. But yes, because Leonard's been in longer than any of them. A lot longer. Yeah.
And like just a series of political prisoners that shouldn't fucking be there. Also, like, but that's the thing. So what he wanted their masks off so that he could go around with roving facial recognition scanners, Dragnet database them, and be like, "You were at this protest. You owe me money." That's fucking evil. That Biden isn't doing that, and if he did, America would fucking revolt.
Does this apply to protesters, peaceful protesters, or does this apply to people who are blocking the highways and the streets?
So the thing is, if you quantify people, and this is me, gonna sound all lefty, but if you quantify people blocking the streets as somehow automatically worth banning, and being violent to, then the truckers in Canada should have been violent too. Those people were commies too. So was the January 6th protest. So were a variety of pro-Trump marches.
The January 6th protests were going into a government building, and there have been lefty protests that were longer than that.
Well, sure,
I don't have a problem with you. I don't really have I really don't have that much of a problem with you. Just going into a government building. People have done it at the state capitol here too. And furthermore,
they also block the street.
Vehicles are allowed to be on the road. It's, there are so many open spaces in Buenos Aires where you can just go out and protest. I mean, in front of the Congress building, in front of Milei's house. I mean, you can just stand on these sidewalks of these lawns and protest.
So the French tractor protests, you also don't like those? The Canadian trucker protests?
I mean, they were cars on the road. They're allowed to be on the road.
But they were blocking traffic. If that's the deciding factor, they were blocking traffic too.
What was the nature of their blocking traffic? I mean,
vax lockdown restrictions.
But what was the nature of their traffic blockage? I'm not asking why. I'm asking.
They parked in the middle of the road, so cars couldn't get through. So the fact that they weren't people on the road is irrelevant. They were parked in the middle of it. They're still blocking it.
Also, I was going to make a quick point to all of this. Well, a couple things are. One, I was listening to Conkin yesterday, and he said, like, be careful, people, like, hey, who say I'm an ANCAP, a libertarian, they put on that pin. Then you say, oh, well, that's great. Well, the CIA said, or he put like a joke, like the IRS says, we're libertarian now. Oh, I only get incarcerated for 1 year for tax evasion, not 2. And that's one thing to keep in mind. As far as what he's doing with facial recognition, I looked at, this was Brazil 247. Now I get it. there's bias everywhere. But essentially, Minister of Security Patricia Bullrich announced an even more reactionary protocol for street closures and demonstrations. Information and Clarin. They also introduced they'll use a facial recognition system to identify protesters and strip them of their social plans. There's 3 facial recognition systems in Argentina. All 3 work in a similar way. First, you need a high-resolution video camera, may or may be not connected. Facial detection can be done live. Otherwise, you simply record images, and then you need software, and the program will recognize that person's face. You obtain biometric data, provide your first and last name. This is getting kind of Orwellian. Database can be National Registry of Persons or National Symbol of Rebellions, used to search for fugitives, which had 2019 more than 40,000 people on that list. So, for me, and to address the protesters thing, yeah, it does depend, because there's farmers now in Europe because of inflation. Because in my opinion, these governments have spent so much money to fight Putin, to fight Ukraine. Not a Putin fan, but here's the problem. Now they have spent so much money. I think inflation has gone up so high that these farmers can't make food. When you can't make food, that's a huge problem for Europe. Also, yes, there are probably other concerns like immigration and other that stuff.
That's part of it. But devaluation was the prime reason for protest. And in Argentina, he's literally helping Ukraine and Israel. So I don't know what you're talking about.
There was a large dichotomy between the official rate of dollar exchange and the street rate of dollar exchange. He was basically synchronizing the official rate with what you actually get on the street.
But he was doing that while lowering it instead of heightening it. He could have kept it at that level, and people would have had a lot less to protest over. But instead, he cut it as part of shock therapy so that he would have more money to put elsewhere. Like, an oopsie accidental salary increase for him that he totally didn't mean to do.
Yeah. And also, I'm holding.
I don't know if Milei's in this for his own salary. He used to, when he was in Congress, he would raffle off his own salary. He'd have a lottery every month, and he'd give his paycheck to the winner.
Yeah, I heard that. Like, I'll say this: like, cutting government positions, good. Firing government people, raffling off your salary.
Yes,
I get it. But the hard part is, if you say you're an Ancap, just like I say, if I say I'm going to be a power lifter, you're going to be, held to a pretty high standard. It's like, no, I'm going to go drinking every 2 days. Like, whoa, no. If you're just an average weightlifter, yes. You're just saying I'm a regular libertarian Republican. I'm just going to cut a few jobs, but I'm going to maintain the status quo. Okay. No one's going to get really excited. But when you take on that label, and I guess people are excited because, yes, this is the first time in recorded history where someone with the label of anarcho-capitalist wins. So everybody wants it to kind of work out. Just like, if Mises Caucus ran somebody for Congress, obviously you'd have a bias. You'd want things to work out. Or if Amash won, you probably want things to work out in his favor. And I think that's the issue, is we need to be careful of people who just have the libertarian label, but then do things that aren't libertarian, like we talked about. I'm not saying every single thing is bad. There are some libertarian stuff he's done, like cutting down government jobs is good. Getting rid of regulations and departments is good. But the problem is, it still seems, even though he's done some of that, just like Trump got rid of some regulations, pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. Okay, that's good. Pulled out of NAFTA. Okay, good. But then they still have very, very statist agendas and very, very statist, leanings and policies. So to me, I really feel there's not going to be, I'm not going to say politics is completely useless. I think you can do some stuff on the local level, and that's where I differ from a lot of agorists or maybe people who are not voting. I think you can do stuff on the local level, and I think those things are winnable, especially in America. Let's start there. Let's go from there. Instead of trying to put hope, I hope that I can get an ANCAP president, because that is also a contradiction in terms. It is good to get rid of government. Yeah, I think we'd all applaud that. The problem is what are you doing aside from that, liberty wise? Are you actually pushing the country towards freedom, or are you pushing the country towards debt with the IMF, or to work with more globalists? And I almost feel he's either doing one or two things. He's making a ton of concessions and trying to win the game, or he is really playing ball with these people, which would not be good. It's almost convenient for the elites too, because they can say, oh, well, you got your anarcho-capitalist in, and he worked with the IMF, and he worked with this, and he worked with Yellen, and he worked with Blinken, and he bought these, F-16, and he did all this stuff. That's what ANCAPs do, I guess. I'm like, no, that's
Well,
really
yeah,
not.
I know it's, I hardly pay attention, but you have these, I'd call them court. They're not really libertarians, but call them these court libertarians, and yet they never say anything controversial or say anything that even promotes liberty. Somebody like Tyler Cohen or yeah, and I mean, it's like, why would? Yeah, it's really. Some even said that about Milton Friedman. It's
Well,
they,
and Milton
and
Friedman
corona and coronavirus exposed this so horribly. I was in shock, and I have to admit that's part of what made me so cynical right now, because in so many ways I think the American liberty movement is still in a shambles right now.
Yeah, and like, well, just to put a pin on that, they are literally using a fundraising contest to decide who gets to be the Libertarian Party debate this year. The top 5 funded people.
I said movement. I did not say party. I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
I chose my words for a reason.
Well, Sarweasel is a problem. So is the modern incarnation of LP leadership, if you can call it that. So is the non-political libertarians, because a lot of them, will turn out to be political, like Sal the Agorist being like, oh, I'm an Agorist, and then he supports Putin, Pinochet, and Milei. Like, all these people just supporting whichever authoritarian happens to tickle their fancy at the moment, and by fancy I mean cock. And that's the whole idea. When we have people involved in these circles, we need to make sure that these circles are actually those kinds of people, that we are not getting infiltrators. It's the same kind of thing you have to be careful of on the left, is not getting red-brown alliances.
Yes, you have lots of. That's always a danger. And I've heard it's been involved with a lot of these organizations for a long time. You have, and if you become important, you're probably going to get infiltrated. It's unfortunate. You have to be mindful of it, is one thing. I think a lot of times it might not even be the American government. I think we've probably got Mossad agents in some of these organizations in America.
Well, that's why I say Western, because Western includes Israel,
Yeah,
and Ukraine, and the Trilateral Commission, and the blocks of Europe that are not honestly pretty much all of them at this point, but the majority of the ones in the western part of Europe, because you get further east, you get people more sympathetic to fascism, especially Russian friendly fascism. And when you, so my point is that we got to be very careful, and these sorts of people in Western power, these people are enabled by the hegemony, and therefore have an incentive to enable the hegemony. It's why would I go against my own investments? And it's sort of like that with, for instance, the U.S. funded a bunch of Ukrainian nationalists who, had a huge amount of issues, let's say, with Banderite Nazis, and a bunch of shit like that. They did that from the late 40s onward as part of their programs to control Soviet Russia, to control Russia after the collapse of Nazi Germany, because they were very powerful. They were the people to basically put the final nails in the coffin of the Nazi regimes. And when you have these these people getting this mentality of, we're the anti-Nazis, we're doing awesome shit, but those people also have values that fundamentally conflict with Western values, you have to say, well, you're going to be crushed. We're going to crush you. And if you don't, you risk losing legitimacy on an international stage. So they worked with the Mujahideen, they worked with the Nazis, they worked with Ukrainian nationalists who had, as part of their decalogue, enslave foreigners and expand greater Ukraine. They worked with like far right groups in like South America. They did the Iran Contra affair and pushed cocaine into the inner cities. They worked with like the literal KKK in a variety of circumstances. They have all these like people who reify American capitalist ideas, at least, state capitalist, not like, fucking Ancap.
State capitalist, yeah.
Yeah. And like when they have all these people, they align with them for a reason. And it's because they don't like Ancaps, authentic Ancaps. They don't like, authentic libertarians. What they like is people who reify their position in capital markets.
Yeah.
And Russia didn't.
Yeah, and Ukraine was in a very complicated position. I mean, I know one lady from Poland who said, I had one grandparent in Hitler's concentration camps and one grandparent in Stalin's concentration camps.
Mm-hmm.
When you're stuck between two monsters, sometimes it's a delicate situation. I've got a meeting in 10 minutes, and I mentioned that to Kareem, so I'm probably going to have to go here pretty soon. So.
Yeah, well, say what you need to say. I've said what I needed to say. So
I understand that I think you guys are just really cynical about politics. It's not necessarily Milei, but I understand where you're coming from. And that's what we need. We need to be able to disagree with people while understanding where they're coming from.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that will make sure. A lot of times I've remained calm, and people are like, well, you remain calm, you get your points out there, and then people listen, and then I can usually convince a lot of people if there's something that I think is pressing. The issue is there's a lot of people, especially now with what's going on in Europe and the Middle East, that they have one viewpoint. And if you're on that viewpoint, they want to fight. And I'm like, wait, just slow down. I get some viewpoints are really bad, and some things are inflammatory and you should fight. But most of the time you can sit down and be like, all right, here's the issue here, and here. And then you can even stack the issues once you get better at debating. Yeah. You can be confident and cool. 9 times out of 10 people will listen to you. I'm not going to say that, oh, wow, I have the ability to mass transform anything yet. But if I'm cool and collected and I sit down and be like, hey, here's what so-and-so said, or here's how you implement Rothbardian ideas, or here's how you implement and calm ideas, or even agorist or mutualist ideas, people sit down and say, well, Kareem's pretty chill. He got his points across. He's not freaking out. Then, I can get my view across. I remember Colonel Douglas McGregor, criticized generals, and he'd been in this while, and he said, by no means an anarchist, but he said there are generals who get emotional about stuff, and he would always say, control yourself. This isn't about you. This is about making the right decision for your country and the military, not just saying, well, me big mad because someone doesn't agree. And if you can rationally, reasonably, and calmly point out some of these issues without using ad hominem, straw mans, pissing people off, although sometimes we do, then you get the point across. So, Chris, always good to talk to you.
Okay, well, have a good night, guys. Yeah, hopefully we'll see out this later. Yeah, I'll have to. Yeah, I'll just leave the studio, and that's it. Have a good night. Go check out the Fountainhead Forum on YouTube. I think I got about 168 videos up now. We talk about a whole lot of things.
We'll do the Whiskey Rebellion. We'll have you back for that. We'll have you back for that.
What I've thought about might be interesting. I've done a few states. Just have somebody who really knows Pennsylvania history. Pennsylvania has a lot of great history there. Whether it be William Penn or the Whiskey Rebellion or Franklin or it's an amazing. I had one guy talk about Florida. I had a well, you probably know the one guy talk about Alaska. So yeah.
Leighton Radner.
Yeah, Leighton. Yeah, Leighton. Yeah. Okay. Well, have a good day. Yeah. Bye.
Be well.
Yeah. Bye.
All right. So that was good. Nice, chill, and civil. Actually, it was a debate discussion, so I changed that up. Anything else on the Milei?
I mean, people who want to know my views on Milei can find me elsewhere. I don't, I said what I needed to say. Like, there's some other stuff that maybe we could have gotten into, but I don't know. That would be just waxing my cock because people on this channel already know what that is. Like, anybody who's been on this channel for any amount of time knows my views on Milei. So it's like, the discussion was fine.
Yeah. I'll say it like, Keith said, these guys are a dime a dozen. The thing that I'm more worried about is the point Conkin made, where it's like, I'm a libertarian. I got the badge. I got the porcupine. Oh boy, I'm a libertarian. Yeah, let's ban guns. Let's do this. Oh, income tax should be 5%, not 10%. And that's why.
That's very Hagopian core.
Yeah, I mean it is, but like, I like Todd, but here's the issue. I think it's also not just Milei, but there are people like RFK is based. He said he'd pardon Snowden. I'm like, maybe, but he's not good with guns. I wouldn't play that. He's not good with the environment in terms of pushing people. He's not good with the Middle East. He's not good on a bunch of stuff. But people
also like,
yeah,
chance. Like I mean. Maybe if he could finish the sentence, he could pardon some of these people. But I have a feeling he's going to get stuck halfway through and then start talking about trans people.
Yeah, or so, hey, Jeremy, I really don't. It's just, and he's not. Let's face it. I'm be honest. If you're going to really crush a campaign, I think you at least want to be. Well, I guess the bars are so low now, but they used to have to be good speakers. I'm not a fan of anything Obama did, but it's like, I'm Barack Obama. I'm pretty smooth. At least he could get an idea across where these candidates, we have candidates now who are geriatric and can't talk. So that's where we're at. We're there. Idiocracy coming next. All right, guys. That was
besides, who needs a porcupine?
I'm a headshot. I'm an angry avocado. I like those frogs. You just put them. They're like. So, with that being said, I personally am still on the side of Milei being a neoliberal. Who's saying he's an Ancap. Who other people are saying he's a classical liberal, but he's an Ancap in theory. I still have time to be proven wrong, but I have a sneaking suspicion that, hey, the IMF got their guy. They got a label they like, and they flew under the radar and got a bunch of libertarians to go, woo, the state's cool now. Hey, do you know what you're doing? No. Oh, crap. So hopefully people wake up. People see what this is, and let's try to do things locally. That's all I got. Check out Bookchin.
I've just got, the fascist state is global. It's omnipresent. It's watching you right now. And anybody who even remotely tries to enable any aspect of it is my enemy. And I will do whatever I can to crush them. Javier Milei is one of those.
But I like my spyware American. I don't need that TikTok. I like Facebook and Google spying on me.
What's great is so many people who say that they don't know the CIA history of Facebook or Google or any of these things. And then when I bring up CIA, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, they don't. But like that's a topic for another day. Just the absolute invasion of technocracy into our lives and technology that enables it. Because like for all these alleged anti-globalists who sell out to the first globalist who wears yellow and black, like the general thing that I think that they miss is that if you're the carbon they want to reduce, then all this technology that they're building is the way that they will track you and make sure that they can do it. Milei is one of those people, and so are so many people in domestic affairs, and like from Peter Thiel to Elon Musk, they're all trying to copy WeChat in one way or another, and they hate your freedom. They want to destroy you. They want you either dead or in chains, and you should resist them with every fiber of your being.
I agree with that. So on that note, this was another awesome episode of The Essential Libertarians. Going to send this out to the Mises Caucus and all my libertarian friends that have some technical issues. So thanks for bearing with me. But hopefully these rational, calm, well thought out points. There's no yelling, there's no weirdness, but there were some legitimate criticisms of Milei. So take this into consideration and see what you think. You might just say, hey, I'm going to be on the other side of history, but I'll say not all hope is lost. I think things can be done on the local level. But for that, you have to put on the electric slide and slide to the left and read Community Cities and the Left by Murray Bookchin or Bakunin or any of the other people who came up with alternative structures to do things at the local level, or even or even Konkin, or if you're on the right, Rothbard. So with that, that's all I got. Also, big shout out to Noah, popped in. Lizard Jesus of Mad Liberty, go check them out on the Discord server. And Insanity Stream from Anarch Unity, Agorist Nexus, and a whole bunch of other stuff.